Hello, and thank you for joining us. This is No Soundbites Allowed, and I am your host, Michael Voss, Dragon of the Southern Tier. I'm happy to be here with you today. So, folks, it's just getting darker. It's just getting more confused. The more we hear about the protest at Washington, D.C., the more we see Democrats lose their mind, pushing forward, rushing to try and get changes done, the more questions we seriously should have. I know it's very confusing for a lot of people. A lot of people are very concerned. It should scare us all, but there's a lot of misinformation out there, and we want to go over an example of that. Before we start, though, we do want to mention that this program is the first time that you're seeing it. We do a long-form political commentary, and every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we do a live stream with you where you are able to respond and tell us what you think about what is happening in our nation. And that's something we do because we believe in the First Amendment. So we hope to see you on Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Now, let's get to the issue at hand today, and let's talk about this. Now, I'm going to be specifically speaking about Senator Tammy Duckworth, who has made a demand on the Pentagon for an investigation. And this is an article that you can see came from Politico. It was published yesterday, January 11th. And so we want to discuss this because it's I think, endemic of what we're seeing throughout the process. Because right now in our nation, we are seeing a rush. Democrats are using this event and this confusion to try and pass and enact many things that normally they could never do. We're seeing an attempt to use the 25th Amendment to impeach the sitting president when he is not impaired. That is not what the 25th Amendment is for. It is wrong. We're seeing some people call for the 14th Amendment, Section 3, to be enacted, which does not apply. We're seeing a lot of actions. We're seeing members of Congress, Democratic members of Congress, trying to enact various legislations in this claim that there was an insurrection. It's very troubling because we're seeing a lot of growth and overreach of government power in many different ways, and that's not good long-term for the nation, in our opinion. But returning to the article by Duckworth. So, Senator Tammy Duckworth out of Illinois is an Iraq veteran. Great. And she has demanded that the Pentagon start an investigation because there are allegations that U.S. troops and military retirees that were involved in the U.S. Capitol mob. So let's stop for a second. I want to show you a timeline. This was created by Newsmax. And in their timeline, which is being corroborated by other sources, at 12:40, the first protesters were arriving at the Capitol. It wasn't until 1 p.m., that President Trump finally finished his speech on January 6th. By that time, or shortly thereafter at 1:50 p.m., the Capitol had been breached. And we saw that the Capitol police chief had seen officers attacked at 1 p.m. and at 1:09 had requested the National Guard. President Trump had not finished speaking to the crowds that came to support him. They didn't arrive at the Capitol until nearly 2 o'clock. So we're looking at two very different groups of individuals that were involved in this, and very hard to say that there was anything being cited, as the Capitol had already been breached prior to them being able to get there. That's according to the timeline as presented by Newsmax that is being supported by other documentation. But let's go to Senator Duckworth, because let me start with a very important statement here. Military retirees. Senator Tammy Duckworth is asking for a Department of the United States, the Pentagon, to investigate military retirees. What is a military retiree? A United States citizen. They're a regular person. Those who have served in the military are American citizens. And because we swear an oath to the United States, we become property of the United States at that time. That's your military service. That's why the Constitution does not apply to members of the military. That's why we have something called the Uniform Code of Military Justice, UCMJ. It's entirely different. And she, as a Iraq War veteran, a member of our military, knows this. Military retirees are just civilians. Yes, they are civilians that have had prior military experience, but they're not the same thing. And they do not fall under the jurisdiction of the Pentagon. In fact, to have the Pentagon investigate military retirees is an overreach of the power of the Pentagon and a serious and significant problem. We should be troubled by that. Let me go on. She mentions that there was a letter that was sent to Defense Secretary Chris Miller, where she asked for the cooperation of federal agencies with the Capitol Police to investigate active duty or retired service members in what she called an attempted coup. Let me take a moment. Let's actually see, what did she actually say? And this is a copy of the letter from the United States Senate from Senator Tammy Duckworth. And in this, she mentions very early on that Donald Trump was inciting a violent mob. That's not a fact. That's a question. That's a subjective statement. Many Democrats may feel that way. Many conservatives do not. But let's go on. Saying that there was a delay in the electoral count caused by Donald Trump and this mob. Well, the delay actually was happening in the Capitol, separate of anything that Donald Trump was doing, separate of anyone in the mob, and is a constitutional right that several members of Congress, including Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley, were enacting because that's what their constituents wanted. Duckworth and many of the Democrats seem to forget there are millions of Americans who have questions, and those questions have yet to be answered. And in each case, they've been told, just let it go, unite and submit. Now, she goes on to say, we must demonstrate resolve and resilience in bringing the neo-Nazis, white supremacists, and conspiracy theorists who formed this mob to justice. How do you know that? I have to ask. It's a very important question. She's just made an allegation against American citizens, and she has attributed to them some of the most darkest and vile thoughts that could be said about any human being. How does she know? She doesn't know who these people were. She didn't invite these individuals, did she? She hasn't seen resumes or any of their internet postings. That's why we need an investigation to find out who these individuals were and what their motivations may have been. But at this time, there is no proof. It wasn't some single group of individuals that stormed the Capitol. There were members of Antifa that were present. It has been confirmed by various news media. They were there. They wouldn't qualify under her definition that she's just made this allegation of. Does that not matter? What about other individuals who are just there, swept up in the moment? It is dangerous when a member of Congress is attributing motivations and organizational membership of American citizens just because they want to, just because it's politically advantageous. That doesn't bring America together. That brings us apart. That is a problem. We must, she goes on to say, we must address deeply troubling reports that members of the U.S. Armed Forces, retired members of a regular component of the United States Armed Forces, and members of the Fleet Reserve, Fleet Marine Reserve, have violated their oath of enlistment or oath of office by participating in a violent insurrection. Let me stop for a second here. We keep hearing these words almost interchangeably. There was a violent coup. There is a violent insurrection. That's really not accurate. It's not true. It's not factual. These people are using words in ways for their political benefit, but it isn't actually how the word is used. Let's go back. What is an insurrection? Well, according to Oxford Dictionary, an insurrection is a situation in which a large group of people try to take political control of their own country with violence. The synonym would be an uprising. Going to the Cambridge Dictionary, an insurrection is an organized attempt by a group of people to defeat their government and take control of their country, usually by violence. So let's really understand this. Was there a organized attempt by anyone? No. Video has shown it. We've watched it very clearly. We saw there was no organization. There was no organized group. These were, as far as all can be seen and all could be told, various random individuals and various random groups. Like I mentioned, Antifa was present and was part of those who were destroying property and breaking into the Capitol, along with other groups of who knows what kind of affiliation. This wasn't organized. And let's go even further. Were they trying to defeat the government and take control of the country? They had no demands. They had no list of demands, no organized goal in mind. Nothing has been reported. In fact, where did we see a list of demands created? Well, I'll give you a great example here. In case you may not recall, it was on June 11th, as reported by Newsweek, we saw that the Seattle Autonomous Zone, also known as the Chaz or later the CHOP, did put out a list of demands. They did take over property in America. They did hold other American citizens hostage within their autonomous zone. And they did state that they were separate. They had seceded from the United States. That is an insurrection. And they did make demands. In fact, a list of 30 demands that they had published for change and control of a government. That would be an insurrection. But as we were told by Democrats in the news media over and over again throughout the entire summer, oh, no, that was just a protest, a mostly peaceful protest, even though 2 children died during that insurrection, that action in Seattle. So to say that there was an insurrection, an organized attempt by a group of people to defeat their government and take control of the country, that isn't what we saw on January 6th. It wasn't even a large group of people to try and take political control of the country with violence. They weren't trying to take anything over. They had no demands. They have no leader. There was no organization. There was a lot of emotion, but no organization. You can't even call it a coup, which, again, going back to Oxford Dictionary, a coup, a sudden change of government that is illegal and often violent. They weren't trying to change the government. They were trying to demonstrate, but there is a difference. So Senator Duckworth seems to be making a lot of allegations and demanding actions without any proof, without a proper investigation, attributing some of the worst motivations to American citizens without any verification other than her own political and personal beliefs, her preferences, her ideology over any facts. because facts are in dispute of what she is saying. And she's asking the United States Army Criminal Investigation Command to investigate American citizens. She's asking the Naval Criminal Investigative Service, the United States Air Force Office of Special Investigations, the United States Marine Corps Criminal Investigation Division, and the Defense Criminal Investigative Service to cooperate with the FBI on investigating American citizens. Remember, she's asking them to look into retired members of the military, former members of the military, otherwise known as citizens. This is an overreach of power of government. This is wrong. And some could say that that is an organized attempt to take over a government. This is a problem. But let's go back to the article from Politico, because it gets even worse. Because I do believe that it is deeply troubling. And as Duckworth's letter came in reply to what she called deeply troubling reports that active troops and retirees took part in a violent insurrection. There was no insurrection. This wasn't Seattle. This was not an autonomous zone. And she even admits, if accurate, she states very clearly, she may be wrong. She's attributing these actions and motivations to American citizens without any proof. If accurate, it would be disgraceful, be a disgraceful insult to the vast majority of service members who honorably serve our nation in accordance with the core values of their respective services. Well, how do you know they haven't? How do you know that they did something that wouldn't be? Because as I understand, and as a former member of the military myself in the Marines, and from a family of military service members, we're all civilians. We didn't give up our right when we left the service. We retained and always maintained our right for the First Amendment to peaceably assemble, to protest, to free speech. Now, let's be clear. We are not supporting, and we have always said on this channel that we abjectly and absolutely reject anyone who uses fear, intimidation, or violence, or the threat of violence to cause others to submit against their will. We say that about BLM, Antifa, the far left radicals, and we would say that about the far right radicals as well. There is no one that does not apply to. If there is anyone using fear, intimidation, force, or the threat of violence, we reject them categorically and in total. At the same time, we also understand that Senator Duckworth is out of her mind, that she is making allegations against American citizens without proof, seeking to punish them without cause. And that is an overreach of government. That is a misuse of the power of the government, in our opinion. And she wants... Now, Duckworth goes on to say, if any such individuals are identified, Duckworth urged Miller to take, quote, appropriate action to hold individuals accountable under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, the UCMJ. Well, again, let's stop and think about this for a second. If you are not an active member of the military, if you're not a member of the reserve, the UCMJ does not apply. The entire purpose of the Unified Code of Military Justice is the fact that the Constitution does not apply to members in the military. When you swear your oath, you become subject to the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Anytime before and after your service, you're subject to the Constitution, the amendments, and the laws of this nation. To insist that the Defense Department should apply military regulations, which are not constitutional and far more restrictive on the lives and actions of individuals, as it should be for a military to apply those standards to civilians is wrong. Abjectly and absolutely wrong. Now, the article goes on to mention that Democratic Senators Chris Murphy of Connecticut, Martin Heinrich of New Mexico, and Kirsten Gillibrand of New York were slamming what they called a lack of urgency in response to the riot. Well, this is very important because that's part of the claim that there was some mass conspiracy that was going on, why this would be an insurgency, that some members of the United States military at the highest levels were complicit in trying to take over the Capitol, which there is no proof of. There are allegations, there are whispers, but there is no proof. This is just merely rhetoric to gin up supporters of these Democrats in their efforts to gain more political power. In fact, in this article itself, left for the very last paragraph, it does state that, however, top defense officials have stated that D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser deliberately limited the Pentagon's role in the riot response ahead of Wednesday. Not that they didn't send out messages, but they made it a point. Matter of fact, if we go to the Daily Herald and their article, which was published on today, this morning at 6:48 a.m., that's the January 12th, we see that, in fact, use of the National Guard, particularly in Washington, in D.C., is a complicated process, tangled in an array of jurisdictional issues between city and federal agencies. The original plans called for having a small National Guard presence with a limited role. Let me go further. They said, I just want to make sure. There it is. About 340 members of the D.C. National Guard had been requested by Mayor Muriel Bowser. Because the district is not a state, the Defense Department has authority over D.C. Guard, and that control is delegated to Army Secretary Ryan McCarthy. The Pentagon approved Bowser's request for Guard troops to support the D.C. police in protests. Now, this is important. Based on the agreement with Washington, D.C., the Guard members were deployed early last week to about 30 checkpoints and half a dozen metro entrances. The agreement for the National Guard being in Washington, D.C., coming from Mayor Bowser, the agreement stipulated that their deployment was restricted to traffic control and crowd issues, and they specifically were not to be armed or in riot gear. So we're listening to these members of Congress like Kirsten Gillibrand and some of her cohorts in the Senate, Chris Murphy, Martin Heinrich, and of course, Tammy Duckworth. You would think that there was something insidious that was done because they are willfully ignoring the fact that Muriel Bowser herself said, no, the National Guard's to be used on traffic control, and they couldn't be armed, and they were away from the Capitol itself, which means that they couldn't help in the response. Now, there's a lot of questions that go on about what's happening. I mean, U.S. soldiers fighting against American citizens, everyone is concerned about that kind of action. And we've seen time and time again, like in Seattle, where we have watched the government, either by direct request of elected officials or just because of inaction, have allowed protests and riots to take place, and even the act of insurrection, of taking over property against the will of those who own it, and seceding from the United States with a list of demands. And a leadership organized So this is a big deal. We have a big problem. This is just very upsetting. And I'm only looking at just that one article from Politico. We're looking at the one response from Senator Duckworth. But the point is, this is a dark, dark place that we are going in our nation. We are looking at very select and apparently almost entirely Democrats leading a charge for the government to take greater power than it has ever had before in ways that violate the actual stipulations, the safeguards separating our military and our civilians, that limit the power of our government over the people who, again, the public, we the people have all the power in this nation. We need to seriously stop the Democratic surge seeking to label anyone and everyone who has disagreed with them as insurrectionists. We need to highlight and remember that it was Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, who usurped her power, who overreached and went to the Joint Chiefs of the military to ask them to have a military coup against President Trump, a sitting president. And that was proven and identified by the New York Times as we went over this Sunday in our live stream, which you can see. And links to everything we've been talking about will be in the description here for you on YouTube. So let us say it again. This is troubling. There are problems here. And the problems are actually bigger than the protest in Washington, D.C. and the violence that occurred, which we do denounce that violence. But we are watching our Democratic leaders abuse our country and take advantage of this emotional turmoil for their own political gain. And that is a problem. That is a problem that we should all denounce and tell them to step back and think about what they're saying. You want the full power of the federal government to be used against our retirees, American citizens? That's not right. To label something an insurrection that is by definition and obviously not, while denying those things that were, that's a problem. And the only reason that this is being done that we can determine is because of political power. Democrats are celebrating the fact that they have more power at this moment, and Republicans are cowering, allowing them to have this power. That's not a good thing for this nation. It leads us into a very dark and very bad place, and it helps to further separate our nation. And we are troubled by this. But you may not be. You may think that we have misunderstood this. If you do, if you disagree with us, please do let us know. We believe in the First Amendment. Tell us what you think in the comments below. And on Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we hope you will join us in our live stream as we discuss all of the issues that are affecting us and want to hear your voice, the American people. We look forward to seeing you soon. And if you have found any of this to be of interest, of value, if you enjoy it, please like, share, and most of all, subscribe so that we can reach a greater number of Americans to involve them in this exercise of our First Amendment rights. We thank you, and we hope you have a good day.